Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't done so, why don't you hit the subscribe button for us? It really does help out the channel. Are you a fan of the Sega GameGear, but you're not a fan of the way the screen looks? Maybe you have one, but it mostly sits on the shelf because even though you might have done some work recapping it or putting a new faceplate on it, the screen is just, well, bad, and it's hard to play. Well, we have a new option on the market from RetroSix and Handheld Legend, and it'll make your Game Gear look like this. Yep, absolute new LCD install, and we're going to bring it to you and show you how to get it done. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today on the bench, we have a bit of a fun project. We have a Game Gear that's going to get a new screen. I know on the channel we've done several screens on Nintendo product and even the Atari Lynx, but up until now, the Game Gear, the only option really on the Game Gear was the McWill screen. And while it's an absolute great screen, it's very expensive, and most people don't want to spend $120 plus the installation on their Game Gear. But today we've got a new one. It's from, well, for us it was from Handheld Legends, but it's from RetroSix. This kit, while it's still not cheap, it's better priced than the McWill. Currently, you're looking at about $80 for the kit, opposed to the $120. And unlike the McWill, this one should prove to be a little easier to install. Now, I haven't installed one, so we're going to be walking through this together. There may be a few cuts while I double check instructions. So, as you can see, we've got our Game Gear, and this one happens to be my personal Game Gear. Yeah, it's a blue shell, and it's seen better days. This is not a pristine or mint Game Gear in any sense of the word. This was actually a reclaimed one. I found the shell in a bin of parts at a local game store, and I put the guts in it from another beat-up gray one. So this is already a parts machine. So as you can see from our kit, they supplied us with an LCD panel. And this is a standard LCD, or a thin film transistor, so it should still have a very good picture. And it came with the controller board, as you can see, and some very interesting ribbon cables that will go from these dots on the board to locations on the motherboard inside. It also came with some nice 3D printed parts, and myself just getting into 3D printing, these are actually done very well. But we'll see how they fit once we're inside. Now, this is a full production kit. I personally ordered it straight from Handheld Legend. And by the way, I do get a little bit of affiliate work or promotion from them. So if you use the links down below, there's one for a 10% discount if you're a new member, and of course one that can just help the channel if you're already a buyer from Handheld Legend. So let's move some of this aside, and let's go ahead and look to see what it will take to do. As with all their LCD kits or their screen kits, it says, test before installation. On the IPS screens with the Nintendo product, that absolutely does work. You can plug in the parts and take a peek. But since we have to dissect this board and solder a bunch of stuff, this is pretty much an impossibility. But they still include it with the kit. So, first things first, let's go ahead and just take a peek at what our Game Gear looks like now. And we can use this for reference. Mind you, this one has already been recapped by me. And like I said, this is my personal Game Gear, and we're trying out this new screen before I offer it to customers. Revenge of Dracoon in a USA is a Wonder Boy game in most other parts of the world. But anyway, you can see here's the screen. It's faded and ugly, and just like everybody remembers Game Gears. Which, by the way, was why I wasn't a Game Gear fan when I was a kid. So, let's go ahead and get into this. Okay, I just had a thought. Before we take this completely apart, what I'd like to do is just see what this takes to run, so we can have a comparison of our before and after, and we can get an idea of, you know, power draw and how long the batteries will last. So on my bench power supply, I have it set for 9 volts and a peak of 1.5 amps because it shouldn't be pulling that much. And I have it hooked up, positive and negative, with the same game. And let's just let it get into the title screen real quick. And we're going to take a peek at what it's pulling. So with the volume up a little bit, we're showing 0.24-ish amps. So about 1/4 of an amp is what it's pulling at 9 volts fixed. Okay, so normally on the Game Gear, you're going to use a game bit on this top one. But like I said, this was a parts machine, so it looks like we just have a Phillips in here. To be honest with you, a lot of these that I wind up working on, seems like that game bit screw is missing, which is fine. It's not really needed. It was just something that, you know, Sega decided to do to keep people out of it. That's it. So you've got screw here, screw down in the battery slot, security bit, and then the same thing on this side. And that should get us in. Okay. Now we're going to unplug from the back side. You have volume, or your sound, your power, and a speaker connector. Now, since this one's already been my pick's missing. Oh well. Since this one's already been recapped, we'll do that as another video. If your speaker connection doesn't want to come out, all you got to do is get something sharp right under this edge, and you can lift it out. So for now, we're going to put this aside. Oh, also, something else that was ordered. RetroSix has a nice storage case. I got one of their shells. We'll take a peek at that also. So we'll be transferring those parts into this toward the end. So the next thing we need to do is get our motherboard out. You got 2 main screws here, and then these are number 2 Phillips, and there's several number 1 Phillips around the board. You don't normally need to remove these screen screws on the chrome to get the board out, but we're going to be removing all the screen and the backlight, so we might as well just take them out as we go. For you that have already worked on Game Gears and know the variations of it, this is an ASIC 1 board with the 1 single memory chip. There are an ASIC 2 board, which also, if you look here, it says VA1. So this is kind of the original, or the most standard board is the VA1 boards. And as far as I know, there's these wiring ribbons for both the ASIC 1 and the ASIC 2 boards. Let's see, there's one more screw, 2 more screws hiding up here. and our cartridge slot screws. Missed one down in the corner. Now, as far as I know, like I was saying, they have, for both of the VA1 boards, they have the kit. And we can set our shell aside. And we can set our foam aside. So if you have one of the, what is it, Modesto boards, the K variant, or the one with the black, you know, the white and black printed screen, they do not have a ribbon kit yet for those. Also, some of the other variations of this board won't work. But like I said, for the most part, the VA1 variant is the most common, and that's what they have, you know, available to work with. Okay, so one of the first things we're going to do is go ahead and get this screen off. This one shouldn't be too bad. This is similar to the way it's on a the Sega Nomad. They've got it taped down on one side and then just soldered on connection in the front. If you do it careful, you could probably salvage the screen if you really wanted to. So you're just going to peel off the tape. And we're going to flip it over to get to the soldered side. Let's see, where are we at? That's probably warm enough. I have the soldering iron set to 350 degrees. I don't believe this is lead-free solder. These are too old. But we might want some flux to help this along. Now, if you're not interested in saving this screen at all, you most certainly can just cut it. Although we do need to solder a few connections. To this, to where this ribbon's coming off. Just using a little light pressure and walking a curved tip down the board. I personally don't like to destroy anything I don't have to on these, just because, you know, one time these were junk systems and, you know, people treated them poorly and threw them away and, you know, didn't care about them. But now, with the price of all this retro stuff just getting out of control, you never know. You know, this screen may be wanted, even though it's going to be much more playable. There we go. It's going to be much more playable with the new screen. There's going to still be somebody out there in the future that may want a factory screen. And if we take it off carefully, you know, we can salvage that. So I'm just going to set it aside somewhere safe for now. Where's somewhere safe? I'm just going to set it over here with my parts. Okay, so there we go. We can clean this up. Let's see, does this need cleaned up? Oh, it looks pretty nice. We can just leave it as is. So now that we have that out of the way, we have our reflector and we have our compact fluorescent bulb that needs to come out. So there's a couple ways of attacking this. We could desolder it. We could just, you know what? It's a single pin on each side. We're already, yeah. We're already unbolted, and since it's a single pin, you know, honestly, all you gotta do is put just a teeny bit of pressure here on the plastic, and it'll come out. We can do it to the other side. And it's out. Set that aside. Okay. The next things we need out are these two fuses. And we can do it the same way. A little bit of pressure. Should come out. Just like that. Or it'll break. Okay. Then, according to the instructions, you need to get out this inductor. It looks like the legs are folded over on this one, so we might do some proper desoldering. Yeah, it's these two here that are folded over. I'm just going to go ahead and stand them straight up. You can get anything under there, small screwdriver or chisel blade on a hobby knife. There we go. Inductor's out. And finally, we need to remove resistors 56 and 57. Okay, I got the microscope out so we can see it a little better. So there's where our inductor was. Let's see. It was right here on the board. And here's our two resistors we need to remove. They're pretty small. They should come off fairly easy. A little bit of flux always helps to make the solder flow. I'm not going to bother with the hot air station just because I know most of you don't have it. And we don't really need to try to save these since we're not going to go backwards. And chip resistors are incredibly inexpensive. Here's one. There's two. So it's really just that quick and simple. But for reference, now they're marked what were they, 182 or something. I'm guessing those were 1K resistors. But let's go ahead and check one. Where's the microscope? There it is. Okay, put it under the microscope. They're shown up as 1.8, yeah, they're 1.82K. Okay. So there we go. We know for reference for later on, in case we want to go backwards. So, go ahead and move the microscope and I'll be right back. Okay, the microscope's away, and now we can, let's see. We need to address power. From our power source, there's actually a few different voltages, but one of them is 36 volts, and it's what feeds our old fluorescent tube circuit. So what we need to do is just snip it and isolate it. So we're just gonna go ahead and cut that, and we will get a small piece of heat shrink. Or 2 small pieces of heat shrink. There's one. As it goes flying. And there was 2. While we don't necessarily have to cover this bottom one, it's just good practice. We don't want to... Since I didn't engineer this board, I don't know exactly what it's going to do or what it needs. Okay. And for the most part, our board's prepped. Like I said, this one's already been recapped. Now, on that note, and I have already a recap video planned, but while I am very happy with the majority of the products coming from RetroSix, the one that I'm not too thrilled about, and I tell this to customers all the time, as you can see, I've recapped and I've just used standard electrolytics. RetroSix does sell a kit that's ceramic caps, and as you can see, there's plenty of ceramic caps on this board. So the engineers who built this GameGear know what ceramic caps are used for, and they know what electrolytic caps are used for. There's, to put it in terms, okay, if I take a step back, an electrolytic cap is very much like a small battery. It's a storage device or a reservoir, okay. A ceramic cap, even though they're both capacitors and they both can have the same voltage ratings and they can both have the same capacitance ratings, a ceramic cap is really meant to be a filter or a buffer, not a storage device. So in the circuits where the engineers deemed that they needed storage, that's generally a power circuit. So power will come in if something, you know, like our audio, it gets loud, it gets low. Even the video, it gets bright, it gets dim. And when you have that power fluctuation happening, you need to be able to absorb the current changes. The ceramic caps were really meant for filters on signal lines to pass an AC signal opposed to and stopping a DC signal. But more than that, they can be used for signal level power filtering, but not anything with any real current. So while the ceramic kits do work, I don't have a real warm fuzzy feeling about using them, just because it's the wrong part, to put it bluntly. But up to each individual to put in what kind of kit they want. For me, I'll stick with standard electrolytics. All right, so enough of that. So now let's look at our screen. So we've got two 3D printed brackets here, and well, we got a screen protector that we definitely need to get under. I believe they're going to install like this. I guess we got to take the screen protector off completely. Okay. There we go. They're a little snug, but it shouldn't be a problem. Don't want to get too aggressive with it because we don't want to damage our ribbon cable. This one went on real nice. Okay. And this one has some tape. It's kind of blocking us, and it's not part of the ribbon per se. So let's go ahead and trim that, just so we can get the whole way over. Okay. Okay, that should be fine. I guess this isn't a hook on the bottom, so you can just clip it over like that. Okay, so our brackets are on. And our screen should fit something like that. Yeah. Okay, so those screw holes are going to line up. Okay, I don't like that screen not being protected, so let's just get some of the packaging back. Set it over it, just for now. And our board should fit over top of it. There we go. Okay, our board fits like that. Our screen should sit right underneath it. And let's see if we can get some screws back in it. Since the kit didn't come with screws, I'm assuming we're just using the originals. We might have to hold it to get it to be aligned. Well, I know I've said this in some of my other videos, but this kit is a bit fiddly. All right, so here we go. We got our first screw started. We're not going to tighten it up the whole way, just kind of snug. Okay. There we go. Now I'm going to assume our other holes will line up. That one did. Now remember, these are just 3D printed parts. You don't have to crank on these screws. Just run them till they're snug and then be done. Okay. Okay, I decided to go ahead and get the microscope out so we can get a little closer picture. We're going to try to use both. So I have this off to the side looking sideways. So it's not the best picture in the world, but it should really help us out. Okay, so we've got the board on, we've got the screen on the back with our 4 screws in place. Like I was saying earlier, you can see here, and it's actually not a great shot, but these 2 electrolytics, I just had to lift just a little bit so I can slip the board under it. So what we need to do next is look at our ribbon cables. So the kit came with these couple ribbon cables to, help simplify the installation. So they should just kind of line up with the bits they're going to solder to. And I'm going to take a closer look myself. And oops. Let's see, that's going to go up to the wheel. This is going to sneak around that capacitor. This is going to sneak under those capacitors. It's going to line up something like that. Okay, so we got one on this capacitor, one here on the inductor, up to those wheels, this capacitor, this capacitor. Now this ribbon is a little flexy, so what I'm going to do is add a little flux. I want to just kind of tack it in place to see where we're at. I want to turn my heat back down just because I don't want to accidentally melt our cable. So I'm going to go down to 350 Celsius on the iron, make sure our tip's clean, and we're going to grab good solder. Oops, and throw tools at me. All right. So now what that flux is going to allow me to do is just put a blob of solder there, use some tweezers to kind of push us in place, and oops, give it a touch. Let's see where we're at. That doesn't look horrible, but I just want to scooch it over a bit. There we go. I think that's better. Yeah, that's going to work out better. Let's see. Now we can solder onto the edge of this cap. Okay. That leaves us lined up pretty good on our board here. So let's go ahead, just make sure this ribbon is a little flexy, so we can move it a bit. We're just going to leave that one there. Clean our tip. Get some flux. And we might as well put a little flux right here on each one of these connections. Okay. Okay. It's not great, but it's not bad. A fine curved tip definitely is going to help this project out. All right, so the last one we got here, we need to, here, I'll find it under the microscope. Okay, so the last one here is this little cap. Just needs lifted up a little bit so we can get the ribbon underneath it. There we go. So we can solder that there. Okay. A little solder on each point and flow them together. Okay, so that's what that side's going to look like. I'm going to take a quick inspection. I'll be right back. Okay, I gave it a quick inspection. All of our solder joints look good there. And as I say, it's a bit fiddly. But I will say this, it really very much, these ribbons take the guesswork out of all of it, which is extremely nice. You know, with the McWill, once you start installing it, it's pretty much sitting with the instructions wire by wire, you know, figuring out what everything needs to do. With this, it just kind of lines us up. So as you can see here, I already set the second cable in, and there's a couple key points that I wanted to make sure hit. And one was this row of resistors. And I feel since those are right next to each other, that's probably one of the most important points to hit. Then we can line it up here. And then we'll work around and we'll finish the top side with these, with the points on the board. And then there's a couple spots on the other side. And I will have to verify which connections this makes to the old LCD connector. And that's really the only part of verification in this whole thing. The rest of it just lines up. So let's go ahead and start soldering. Oops. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and put flux on the rest of this just to make sure everything's flowing the way I want it to. As you can see, the flux, a little bit of extra flux and not just relying on the flux out of the solder, really helps the solder joint flow a lot better. Now, it's not looking like we're not lining up all that great here, but we can give that little cable a tweak. Just make sure, oh, look, there is one more spot that we need to hit right there. There we go. Okay. That looks pretty decent. All right, so once again, I'm gonna make a quick inspection and we'll be right back. Okay, all of our connections look nice. And for people that don't have a microscope or don't wanna go out and spend the money, things like these little jeweler's loops are absolutely great for giving a quick inspection. I use this one all the time, especially with like an HDMI port or a USB-C port, just to get a quick look inside, just to see what we're up against. Okay, now as you can see over here on the microscope, and probably even from up top, we're not lined up great. We're lined up okay, but not great. So I think there's enough, flex in these ribbons to just go ahead and, give her a nudge and hold it in place. Put a little flux right there and right there. Wait for our soldering iron to come up to temp. There we go. Yeah, that's nice. That's going to hold it in place. We got a little more stress on that than I would like to see. But, this is going to be inside of a shell. It shouldn't have any problems. Nothing's going to be touching it. But we'll verify as we put it together. Let's just go ahead and put a little dab of flux on each one of these. Okay. All right, that looks pretty good. You could most certainly fill in the circle the whole way around, but to be honest, it's not needed. There's plenty of connection with the solder that's there. And the least amount of heat on the ribbon, the better. A lot of times when I'm working on these systems, you know, I've got lead-free solders and it takes a ton of heat. But we don't want to melt this ribbon off. So we're just going to leave it as is. So I'm going to see our instructions for these last 2 points, and I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. You know, even people that do this all the time, you know, definitely need to check the instructions. And unfortunately, since this is a brand new kit to the market, you know, I've never installed one, and the instructions aren't, you know, exactly clear, but they're writing up some fresh ones and some good ones, I'm sure. So anyway, okay, so this ribbon that we just installed on the other side of the board, we need to solder these 2 pins to pins 9 and 20. So if you see here, they've actually marked number 1 for us. And it's actually the second one with solder. So let's see, number 9 is this one right here next to the, I don't know if that's a ground or a power, but you know, it's a heavier lead. So this is our number 9, and then number 20 is right next to this one that's the pin that's doubled up. So those are the 2 we need to solder to. So I think what we're going to do, it looks as if they have put a small, you know, solder point just to help stabilize it. But I think what we're going to do is put a little tape on this just to kind of hold us in place for a moment. It'll definitely make life easier. And I'm going to put on my close-up glasses. Okay, so let's see. We are not on the right one. We want to be right there. So that lines up. So I'm going to go ahead and, just like before, let's make life easier, add some flux. Flux is honestly just cheap insurance. And for anybody doing any kind of screen install like this that requires a fair amount of soldering on small components, like I said, a small curved tip is necessary, and good flux. So I'm just going to hold this one in place for a second. We might want to use something to bridge that. Okay, so we're being held, but oh, nope, it popped off. Okay, so let's go get some 30 gauge. Where's our flux? There's our flux. There we go. Makes for a nice clean joint. This is the one right next to that fat wire. There we go. And we can clean up with a little alcohol. And honestly, I'm just going to leave that tape right there. It's heat proof and electric proof. It's just a good all-around electrical tape. All right, that should be everything. I'm going to take one final inspection. I'll be right back. Okay, I gave it a quick once over, and it looks like all of our solder joints are good, and everything's lined up the way it should. One concern, while the camera was still off, I decided to put this the LCD ribbon cable on the board, and it's a pretty snug fit, and the problem is it's not exactly aligned. Maybe in new revisions it will be corrected. It's not impossible, but you have to be extremely careful. You have to hold it just right and get it to slide in. I'm sure it'll work because everything, the bail closed, and we seem to be in place. So just keep that in mind for anybody doing this themselves. Just make sure that that is exactly in place. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention, like the McWill, this kit will also output VGA if you want to cut a hole in your shell and put a VGA connector in somewhere. So anyway, so all of our soldering's done. All of our installation is done. So the next thing we need to look at is our shell. We're going to go ahead and put it in one of these RetroSix shells that also comes from Handheld Legends. I guess it's Handheld Legend, not Legends. And I should make sure I say that correctly. Okay, so what we need to do comes with all the hardware, including the link cable cover. So let's just go ahead and put this down here. Looks like the short screws are probably going to be for our circuit board. These black screws are going to be for our shell, and these two longer ones are going to be our cartridge slot. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to get our power board out and our audio board out of our old shell. So let's go ahead and do that. There's our power board, and here is our audio board. All right. Everything seems to fit very well. But I've used a lot of the RetroSix handheld shells over the past couple years for Game Boys and Game Boy Advanced installations. And everything fits exactly the way it should. Now this came pre-wired with battery contacts, but it did not come with our little shield. So you can usually just peel that right out of your old shell and stick it on. Okay, so now let's look at the front. Oh, it looks like we're gonna need to take our buttons and our speaker. And our speaker is as you can see here, it's got plastic. It's been melted into place. But it did not come with a new speaker capture at all. So I'm going to grab a different speaker and see if this is even going to be salvageable. So I'll be right back. Okay, I got a speaker out of another shell. I didn't want to, I know the speaker in that blue shell was in good shape, and I didn't want to cut that shell because the blue shells are a little more rare than the gray shells. And needless to say, back in the parts area, there's a lot of GameGear bits. So what I wound up doing, and for anybody doing one of these shells, this bit is salvageable. All I did is I took a chisel, hobby knife, and I came across each of the little melted down spots. So we can install our speaker. Is a little notch where that will go. And it looks like the factory bracket doesn't line up with, at least this version of the bracket doesn't line up. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna just stretch this one. See if we can get it to go the whole way. All right, so we were able to stretch it across. It's definitely not the happiest installation, but it should work. The wire routing on some come this way, some come underneath right here. So let's just keep installing. We have our button and our membranes. Now normally I would make sure that the our pads are clean, but you know, since this is my own personal one and I know where it's been and what it's up to and when I rebuilt it originally, we don't really need to worry about that. All right, so now we should be able to take this and set it down in there. And the screen doesn't fit. Huh. There you have it. All right, we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I had to go and, sorry about that. I had to go and find another membrane. Mine disappeared. Usually they're just stuck right there to the underside of the board, but this one wasn't. So we got all of our membranes. We got our speaker in place, wires taped down. Everything's in place now. We had to cut out our post. And you're going to put your wheel in first. And now everything fits. All right. That wasn't too bad, I guess. Losing that top post ultimately isn't that big of a deal. Like I said, there's a lot of times where guys, you know, leave that security screw out anyway. Now these shells from RetroSix aren't like the Prestige shells from that they produce for the Game Boys. These don't have that rubbery coating. At least this one doesn't. I'm not sure if they'll be doing another style in the future or not. But I mean, the quality of this shell is very nice. And the one fitting issue with the screen, I can't blame on the shell. It has to do with the screen just needing a little bit more space. All right. So far, so good. Now we can get our rear shell. We can plug in our speaker. We can plug in our soundboard. And we can plug in our power. Yeah, it looks pretty nice. Just take a look at everything real quick before we close up our shell. Magnet. Everything seems like it lines up pretty nice. I'm just going to go ahead and put a couple screws in loosely, and we'll give this thing a test. Okay, I had a few wires hanging up behind the shell. So, you know, as always, don't force anything. If you look and you're putting some screws in and something just doesn't seem right, don't just crank on the screws hoping that it's going to pull it together. You know, verify everything. So, that's that. We can put our new glass lens on. And I've said this a bunch of times on my channel, you know, make sure you don't go, oh, okay, I'm good, and slap this on, because as you can see, you still can't see through it. Make sure you get that paper layer off too. There it is. Nothing's worse than having to peel a screen back off because you missed it. Oh, that looks pretty nice. All right. Even though we only put a couple screws in, let's go give it a quick test. Make sure that LCD is working. Oh, and look at that screen. That is so much nicer. It's bright, it's big. Absolutely looks great. Even though this isn't an IPS screen, it's such a significant improvement over the old GameGear screen. It's really hard to describe. Now, there are a few things with this one. Our wheel still works. It gets very bright. It's a little touchy right there at the top, but you know what? It works really well. Not complaining at all. And then there's a few modes we can go into. And as I believe, we hold start and number 2, and then we use our D-pad. That goes into the pixel mode. Same size screen. That stretches it, and I believe that's native resolution or an integer scale. Same thing pixelated. Should be a 2:1 scale. Also pixelated. And there's our 1:1 scale. That's native resolution. And I believe probably also the pixelated version. But honestly, I like the first one. That looks really, really nice. And you know, a lot of these other screens I've put in have had the pixel mode, and I've never been a fan of it. I know some people are. If you're a fan or not a fan, why don't you make a comment below? Let me know what you think about that. But as far as the fit and finish of our shell and our new screen, it's really very nice. I did have a little bit of an issue putting a battery in. It was tight when I took a second peek. It looked like where the spring went in, it twisted a little bit. Could have been my fault. I wasn't paying attention when I was pushing the battery in. But that's minimal. Where the speaker goes in, you can't use a factory tray. So if you're buying one of these, order the speaker mount. I don't know if there's one out there yet for 3D print or not, but you know, something to keep in mind. The rest of the shell fits real nice. The buttons feel good. Our volume button scratches the shell just a touch when I'm moving it, but not that big of a deal. I'm sure if I just loosen the screws and move the board, it'll be fine. You know, I very much recommend if you've got a really beat up shell, the price of this shell, you know, could be the same price as just finding a couple spare doors if you need doors and you know, if your battery clips are rotten. But just like everything else from Handheld Legend and RetroSix, just very nice quality. Now, to the truthful point, recording this video has taken some time. I've had to go off camera a few times, double check things, check my work. This is not a beginner install. Even though that the ribbon cables very much help align and keep things where they need to go, it's still not easy soldering to those very small components. And if you've got, you know, I'm using a regulated solder station where I can set the temperature exactly where I want it. I'm using an extremely fine tip. Not the finest tip I have, but it's one of them. If you try doing this with a $15 tool store special that you have no idea how hot it's getting, there's a good chance you might damage that ribbon cable. So keep that in mind. But it's not impossible. An experienced hobbyist shouldn't have a problem putting this in. But on that note, leave yourself a good hour of time to do the install, maybe even a little bit more. But that's it. This one's done and it looks great. You know, I won't have any problems doing these for customers. Like I said, this particular one's going to be mine. And if you have any questions or comments, put them down below. Give us a thumbs up. You know, it really shows if people are liking my videos and I know which ones to do next. Hey, we almost forgot. Beginning of this story, we did a test on our current and what the difference between the two screens is going to be. So here we go. We've got, at 9 volts constant, we have 0.130 amps. We have cut, the new screen cuts the power almost in half. Not quite, but you're looking at about 40% better battery life now. So, you know, even if you're on some big AA's, rechargeables, you know, you might be looking at actually getting 6+ hours off your GameGear now. For that alone, I'm saying it's worth it. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Hope to see you on the next video. Give us a thumbs up. Bye.